Welcome to the Beza Performance live stream. My name is Marshall Henley, and I'm the president of Beza Performance. Today is S&OP Thursday, where we talk about what does good look like, again, with Doug Dedman, my buddy from DBM Systems. And Doug is a thought leader in S&OP, and the only guy I use for our clients. So welcome, Doug.
Oh, good to be here, Marshall.
So today's what does good look like is going to focus on what we call planning horizons. And I'm going to bring up the kind of the stuff we've been using each week as we go through this particular series. And we've covered off family structure, the monthly process, executive presentation. So this week we're going to talk about planning horizon. Why don't you kind of tee up what that kind of means for folks?
Yeah. So, those 8 things, as you just mentioned, as part of this whole, what does good look like series, right? And they really tie to the things that you can access actually with our online assessment as well. But today, what we really wanted to talk about was how far out should I actually do my S&OP plan and planning horizons, and maybe talk about that word that nobody wants to think about, which is, do I have to have a frozen zone? Like what does that mean? And
You
so
probably do.
you probably do. Yeah, you probably do. And so we might get some reaction to that, but I think it's an important one to talk about, because understanding this and how you set it up is pretty important
Yes.
to getting your to getting the S&OP process to work well, to really understand that.
So, folks, Doug did mention our assessment. You should be able to go to baserperformance.com now, and there will be an online assessment that addresses all 8 of these areas and then helps you with some prescriptive ideas on what to do to fix each of the areas that might need some focus. And you can kind of take it in order. You don't have to do it all at once. And I think it's a real powerful tool that we've been able to put together. It's free, of course, and it allows you to look at things the way we've kind of been covering them off during this what does good look like series.
Yep. Yep. And I think, we've been trying to do this on each one, but like kind of level setting for people, just in terms of how do you know you've got an effective S&OP process? And, I like to think about that as the point where the process really intersects with your executive. And that's really the executive S&OP presentation. And so, we've been just using these as to what does it look good? How do you answer these questions? So is your executive meeting a report out, or is it a decision-making meeting? Can you get through the entire business in 1 to 1.5 hours? Does everyone walk out of that with the same, on the same page and ready to execute the same plan? And is your senior executive engaged in the meeting as being a way to kind of check how effective is this? And so if I think about that and I tie it back into a little bit of this idea of the planning horizons that we talk about, for me, that sort of helps what understanding what those planning are, how far out you should plan, and understanding kind of where your firm and frozen zones are really important for everyone to walk out of that meeting in the same page, right? Because if sales is thinking, I've got the capability and understanding that we can, drive this plan up and we'll get them all out the door next week, and they aren't thinking about, well, what is our capability? I could have an issue. And so part of this is having a clear understanding of kind of where those zones are. And we'll talk about that. And then the other part of that is making sure the plan's going out far enough, right? And that we've got a really good balanced plan for as far out as we need to plan. So that's kind of what we wanted to cover today. And hopefully that ties it back to these pieces and how you get to being able to answer yes on all these questions. So really there's 2 things on planning horizons. I've kind of alluded to both of them. One is how far out should I plan? And the second one is the discussion around frozen and firm zones. So I think we can jump into that. But I thought before I do that is maybe to level set a little bit, to be thinking about product, right? And to think about, so if I'm a manufacturer and I'm building something, you should be kind of familiar with the concept of a bill of material, right? So this I've got one up on the screen here. Hopefully you can see that. It's a little Lego car, happens to be called the Red Yellow 100, stands for red roof, yellow body. And if you look at it, it's got a bunch of components, Lego components that went into it to make this car at the top, right? So if we're a manufacturer, we're going to have, we should be kind of familiar with that bill of material, right? And or if you're buying something, as you're if you're buying from a third party manufacturer, they're going to have this bill of material, and it's going to have the components. So when I think about horizons and I think about something like a bill of material, it sometimes is valuable to flip this on its side to look at that bill of material within the context of of lead time. And so what I've done with that, and actually was on the other screen, the length of these lines represents the lead time, or how long it takes for something to happen to build that car. So in my example here, real simply, it takes 1 week for the final assembly of the car. I've got a couple sub assemblies that go in there that happen kind of the week. It takes a week for that to get happened, and then I need the components to be purchased, at the and ready to be there at the beginning of the week. Then I've got some sub assemblies like this tire and axle support, right? That they need to be out there going into 4 weeks. So if I flip that bill of material on the side, you can see that I've got, in order for me to build that car this week, I had to be thinking 4 weeks in advance for some of those components, right? So just a concept of that. And one of the challenges that we have, and this gets into my challenge around the concept of like a real-time S&OP, or I'm moving the schedule around a lot. You can almost think about that if I want to move the schedule for this particular car, all the components with it and when they need to be provided to me all move out. So if I was out here and and I want to move it back in, right? I end up with this kind of thing happening, and I'm reprioritizing my plan by moving things back and forth. And so when we talk about these zones, you can think about this now. So that was one part number and its bill of material. Now I can think about a product family. That might be a whole bunch of these cars in a product family that might have these components plus some other ones. And as I move those schedules around, oops, I went the wrong way. As I move those schedules around, you can think about the fact that I am really moving not only the requirements for the finished product, but all of its components back and forth. So I wanted to level set that. Hopefully, Marshall, that made sense to you just in terms of thinking about, the concept that when I change the schedule for a finished product, if I want to change my priorities, I'm really changing the priorities for all the components that are going into it. Oh, did I lose you?
No, sorry. Just
Yeah.
had my mic off.
Sorry.
Every once in a while I do that just to make sure you're featured, and then I forget to turn it back on. So
No.
this also applies to a lean environment, not just MRP. I think that's a good thing to point out for folks that might be wondering.
Yeah, and I think we can touch on that a little bit as well, maybe later on as we get into it. But yeah, like how you plan these components. I'm not really addressing that, right? But
Right.
yeah, like I might be have a flow line that's producing these cars, right? And those cars may have common components as I look at the bills of material, and they may have unique components. But as I set this rate of the flow line, most likely all your components aren't one piece flow to that flow line, right? Like
Right.
they might be in your plant, but it might also be more that I'm worried about the plant that's supplying to you, right? Your tier one suppliers. And so, you're going to have some sort of buffer of that inventory. And so knowing what the volume level that you're planning on for this flow rate is pretty important to be setting up your Kanbans, for anything that's not part of that one piece flow. And knowing that flow rate's real important to know, well, how do I staff that line in order to do that one piece flow? So the point of this is to say that while some people argue I want to be completely, flexible in my plan, the reality is there's a certain amount of inertia or planning that's got to go in ahead of time in order to accommodate the fact that usually there is some sort of lead time if I spill through the components of a bill of material. And this, right now, I mean, we're working with some people in the semiconductor industry that are, sorry, buying semiconductors,
Yeah.
and they're actually having to look at some commitment that's over a year out, right? They've got to do a commitment to those components, and so they're working on strategies on how do I buffer all that. So having an understanding of this is a pretty valuable thing as we think about these horizons that we need to do for planning.
Well
Hopefully
said.
that
No,
hopefully that
that's
helps.
great. Yeah, I have so many lean clients always worry that they'll think we're talking about only an MRP kind of mindset, and that's not true. So that's very helpful, Doug.
Yeah. Hopefully that gives you a sense of that piece. So let me just jump back for a second. So I just wanted to level set that because I think the term, I mean, I use the term inelasticity, right? I studied economics, so we think about inelasticity of demand, but we really have inelasticity of supply because of the fact that we've got components that, we're kind of committed to. And so to me, I think that hopefully demonstrates sort of what I'm talking about on that side. So
Yeah.
yeah. So now let's talk for a minute about how far out should we plan? And so I would say for an S&OP planning horizon, you should be doing a minimum of 12 months rolling. So why do I say that? Well, first of all, it includes a full year if you've got any seasonality and helps you balance the plan, right? So if I've got something where I've got to build ahead, and let's say that I'm a toy manufacturer, right? And Christmas time is the busiest time for us to sell stuff. I really want to have my plan span over that real busy season so that I'm doing my builds and I've got my plan going from the into the busy season and then also into the quiet season afterwards. So I'm not surprised. Likewise, if I was a snowblower manufacturer, right, which is always appropriate for us in Canada, maybe not now because we're hopefully still got a few more weeks of warm weather here. But if I'm thinking about a snowblower manufacturer, if my fiscal year ended at the end of December and I try to keep my inventory down because that's where I want to end my fiscal year, well, I might be doing myself a disservice because I've got to be building up some inventory for a busy season in January, right? And so, you want to plan to cover all that seasonality. And you also really want to eliminate that kind of end of year horizon surprises, right? Where we reduce inventory or something like that when we get to the end of the year. And then the other one is it eliminates the shrinking planning horizon. And Marshall, I think we've experienced this where we've come into places where the president gets really frustrated because their end of year is the end of September. It's great when I'm sitting in, October, November, and December because I've got almost a full year. But I get to July, and I really only have August and September left, and I have this black hole of what's going to happen beyond that because a lot of people will just do a plan based on their current fiscal year, and
Which
so
we say is not a good practice. I mean, you've got to plan the end of the fiscal year, but your horizon of planning should be a rolling 12 or longer, which we'll get into.
Right. So if I look at it, if I flip over to the 5-section sheet, for example, and this is a company that's got a fiscal year that lines up with the calendar year. So their fiscal year runs from January through to December. But you can see we've extended the plan beyond December and into the following year. And really, what's happening for them is they've got the plan. If you're kind of familiar with this, it's the 5-section sheet, which we bring up pretty often. I actually have a full blown plan of bookings, which is what sales thinks are going to take for orders, shipments, which is our agreed upon shipping plan. I've got my production, which is my agreed upon production plan. And I've got my inventory. Sorry, I'm got the right line here. I've got my inventory line here, which is my projected inventory going forward. And so by doing this rolling 12 and having the plan go out there, really what I'm projecting going forward is is my production, my shipments, and my bookings, and I'm calculating kind of the difference between those, which is my inventory, which if I look at it, inventory is previous inventory plus production minus shipments. And so because I have these two plans, I can see a projection of where my inventory is going to be. And you'll notice that out here in December, I have a negative inventory number. But I'm tracking pretty close all the way. So I might not be too worried about that negative inventory number at this point in time, because that's pretty far out in my horizon, right? And it's a small number, right? It's a small number. These guys are trying to run to a negative inventory, or sorry, a zero inventory. But if I look out in the future, I've got some real big numbers. But I'm not as worried about that. We've got time to kind of fix that plan
Yeah.
as we go there. And you
Strictly
can
speaking, we would say that part of the plan is not a plan, right? It's not balanced. There's no such thing as negative inventory, so you're going to have to deal with it. You're just saying that it's not the first thing maybe that occurs to you on this
it
particular 5-section sheet.
right. It's far enough out in my horizon that at least directionally, I feel pretty good, right? But I'm not worried. I mean, a lot of stuff is going to change between April and December,
Right.
right? And so agonizing over this number is probably not where I want the team to necessarily, get focused. And you can see it on this plan is that the shipping plan gets a little bit murky as I get out here, right? So it kind of drops off into February. But at least I've got a horizon where I'm forcing myself to look beyond the end of the year and start thinking about that plan.
I
And
think one of the objections to using a rolling 12 is often I have no idea what we're going to sell in 11 months or, whatever. So I like what you said if you start tracking it, then you start thinking about it, and then at some point you may actually have a process that at least gets you closer to having some idea of what you are doing in 12 months. And I understand
yep,
there's businesses where that's hard. My business is hard, in terms of doing that, but not having it at all, and especially given what we talked about with the bombs, is just a bad idea. You ought to, you can change it as it gets closer in, but you got to be thinking about it strategically.
and we've covered this before, but I think it's worth looking at. If I go to the graphical view of this and I look at this rolling 12. So rolling 12 means this was the month that we just came out of, right in the middle. And every month going forward, we're adding a month of forecast and removing a month of previous shipments. And we do this on the shipment line. And so you can see with this family, they're actually driving the total volume for a rolling 12-month period up from, I think this number is somewhere, it's about, I think it was 125,000 units, up to really almost doubling that business by the end of the 12 months. So now the question, and what I love about keeping that rolling 12 out there, is this becomes that litmus check for the business leader that says, well, where is that business growing, right? And if this growth looks unreasonable, I might want to call my sales guys in and say, guys, we need to do some work on what that plan looks like, because I don't see where that growth is going to give me some meat behind that, if you will, right? To drive to that growth. Or if I saw that number going way down, I'd want to know, well, what's going on? We think this business is a really hot business, and why is that going on? And so on this, it's forcing you to think about that plan. And then if you add a month every time, it's not like a major budgeting exercise where I got to go, holy smokes, I haven't thought about what's going to happen the next year. What's going to happen the next year? Now I got to do 12 months at a time. Now I'm basically saying, and if I go back to the 5-section sheet for a second, and if I'm sitting and I'm looking at, so we're in the April plan, I'm looking at the next April, my guess is the April plan is going to be kind of an extension of the March plan, right? That we had already figured out last month. So I'm just kind of adding a month, unless there's some major assumption of change in the business. And oh, you're on mute again, Marshall.
sorry, you're going to think about last April and you're going to think about March, and you probably can have at least a starting guess as to what the new April is going to be, and then you start thinking about what other dynamics are in the business. And this
Yeah,
is exactly the kind of thinking we would hope you are doing about the 12-month rolling window. Like
yeah,
where are we going to be in 12 months or more, depending on your lead times. Hey, do you mind
yeah,
if we go back to the numerical 5-section sheet? I
yeah.
wanted to
I've got
point
that up
something
there
out as
now.
well.
Yeah,
So I think we talked about this when we defined the 5-section sheet a while back, but in another live stream. But there is a current year end and a year to date in this column which means we are actually on a rolling 12 basis, still looking at the current fiscal year end where we think we're going to be based on what we've had so far plus the plan. And then our year to date obviously is what we've actually done year to date during the fiscal year. So this is all incorporating the sunset of a fiscal year, but or a planning year, if you want to call it that, depending on your business. But
yeah.
our planning year is rolling in terms of the S&OP process.
Yeah, and in fact, in our newest version of the tool, there's two columns here: current year expected, that's CYE,
Yeah, that's
and
what I meant.
year to
Sorry.
date, right? And so they will line up with your fiscal calendar. And then we actually have added on this the rolling 12 as well, which is the rolling 12 going forward. And
That
we find that
graphical.
to be really valuable
Yeah.
because the current year expected, and I might have a current year expected on my budget, right? But the rolling 12, if the forecast starts to become really murky out here, as I get going into the year, I'm going to start to see that because I would expect in a steady state business, for example, that my rolling 12 should stay pretty close to my current year expected. Does that make sense? Right? Because
Yeah.
my plan going forward, unless there's something drastic that's changing. So that is that to me, that is part of that important thing on that rolling 12, which is it's just forcing you to start thinking about, well, where is this going? And we say this often, right? We say S&OP's got to be the intersection, right, between my strategy and my execution. Well, part of my strategy is, am I growing the business for this particular product family, or am I shrinking that business, or is it staying steady? Where are we at? And this is really part of the way that I see it. So that rolling 12 is pretty darn important to kind of do that.
Yep. Absolutely.
The
Good stuff.
the the other part of that is if we think about if I go back to my PowerPoint for 1 second, the other part is so I want to do at least rolling 12, but I also need to be able to cover my cumulative supply chain lead time. So that cumulative supply chain lead time is really about how much time, if I took that bill of material, if I go back to what that bill of material, I'm just going to go back to my picture of the bill of material. If I look at it, the cumulative supply chain lead time, and I'll go back one more, to make this car is just over 4 weeks if I look at the components. Does that make sense, right? Because these are all the lead times. I'm stacking them. The longest lead time item out here is this axle support portion of the wheel bogey, as we called it. Um, and that's the longest lead time. And so understanding your cumulative supply chain lead time basically says, I really want my S&OP plan to go far enough out so I have some prediction of volume, right? Some volume of the family. So if I started to look at the gross requirements for the components that go into that family, I've got a volume view that covers far enough out to cover the lead time for those components. All right. So I'll give you a real life example of this and what this sort of looks like. So if you just give me a second, I'll pull it up here. Can you still see my screen, Marshall? Yeah, I think you can. So I'm going to have to look at this my screen here, but this is an example product in one family. And this blue line that you see here is the accumulation of the components up until today. And so what this is saying is I have to have 100% of my components in-house and ready in order for me to produce a product today. Does that make sense? I've got to have everything. And as I go out further into the future, I'm committed to less and less of my components. And so I'm basically, this is kind of my level of commitment to what I'm going to build.
Hmm.
In the example here, they're committed to 100% of their components really in the last week. And that's almost like that's their assembly time, if that makes sense, right?
That's most people,
That's and that would be a lot of people. Yeah, you're kind of
or
committed.
later.
Yeah, yeah. You're kind of committed to that one week, and we would typically say that's your frozen zone for your master schedule. Because, in other words, if I have to have all the components for what I'm going to build in that week for the products in this family, if I'm going to change the schedule, that means I'm going to be pulling product off the line, putting some other product on the line. And if everything was common, that would be fine. But if I have unique components now, and probably anybody who's listened to this has seen that experience where, oh, now I got some of the components I need on the line and I have some of the components I don't. And now I got everything at the line and it just gets real messy, right?
Real messy, and
Um,
we've made a change for some business reason that seems like it's an upside, but what we typically are doing is creating a bigger down. The cost isn't worth the benefit for that
right,
kind of movement
right.
in the frozen zone.
So, right. So doing this analysis, so in this example, I'm not going to go through kind of all the thought process on it, but their longest lead time is actually 5 months out, right? That's the longest lead time item of their bill of material. Now that doesn't, there's a further level of analysis you need to know because this is one bill of material out of all of the products in the family. However, if that long lead time item was a unique component, I'd be kind of worried, right? Because that means not only do I have to know how many of the products I want to build, but I kind of have to know which ones I'm going to build if this is a unique component. Now, there's strategies you can take, whether you buffer yourself with some inventory, all the kind of things that you might want to do. You might want to do vendor managed inventory where you put the onus on them. But all that's to say that you need to have some view of what that volume looks like for at least 5 months here. And so if that cumulative supply chain lead time is longer than 12 months rolling, you should be going out longer than 12 months rolling. The other thing I would just comment on this is,
So,
we
sorry, let
do.
me just
Oh, sure.
clarify. So we're saying you should always have a minimum of a rolling 12 planning window in terms of SNRP for the other reasons we talked about. But if your family supply chain lead times are exceeding that, then you need a longer than a 12 months. So 12 is the
That is
minimum.
correct.
But
Yeah,
we have
that
clients
is
that have
correct.
24-month rolling
Yeah,
windows and that kind of stuff.
yeah. And I would say, regardless of how you plan some of these longer lead time items, I would want to go out that far because most likely you're going to be talking about vendor signals that you want to do.
Yeah.
And you know, especially the guys in semiconductor, doesn't mean I got to release work orders and purchase orders all out that far. But if I have a good S&OP process, I should be able to use that to send some sort of volume signal to those long suppliers. We used to do this from an S&OP process for a company that was buying castings from China. And so what they would do is use the S&OP process to basically speak for how much capacity do I want at the foundry for them to do the castings. And then they would have some commitment levels of when do I lock it in as I get closer, right?
Right.
And so, but at least I needed to know for that foundry, far enough out in the future, well, what is the volume level that I need? And then I can start to think about, well, in their case, because they had to commit pretty far out, they would make some decisions about, well, I'm going to commit to the common bodies in the family, right? The common casting bodies that they did.
Mhm.
And so that would be their way of kind of buffering themselves to say, well, I don't want to give away the capacity at the foundry, but I want them to kind of work on. So that's well beyond the S&OP process, but understanding that is pretty critical as you're figuring out the planning horizon. It's pretty important to the process there. We like to show that on the 5-section sheet by having really, we kind of show it here so that everybody can see it. You see this yellow line that goes way out here. We do this by family to say that is kind of our cumulative supply chain lead time. And part of the reason I like to show it on here is because that becomes indication so sales can see it, where you start to know, hey, even in January of next year, if I'm changing this around, I'm already getting into some of my supply decisions around components because I'm into my cumulative supply chain lead time. In their case, they're holding basically a frozen schedule for the first 4 months. And that's just because of the variability in this family, and how they actually have some shared supply resources to this. And so these horizons are really important for the sales team to see, because they know now that changes within here, yeah, they can happen. We're going to potentially have volume changes in there. And you can see, compared to last month, which you can see what our plans were, you can see what our current plan is. There's been some change, especially in the first month. But we're trying to hold that as firm as we can. And then this is giving us visibility of how far out our cumulative supply chain lead time is. And this is part of the, if you tuned in a couple of weeks ago, we talked about family presentation. This is part of the kind of the standard thing to make sure everybody understands where those horizons actually are. And so that hopefully gives you a bit of a sense of how we think about those horizons.
And just as
And how
a
we
side note, for this particular client, obviously they were sunsetting their demand plan through March, and
yeah,
we helped them stop doing that for this April plan under the bookings I'm referring to. So
yeah,
the plan orders, and that allows you to enable the rest of that balanced plan logic that kind of extends into that period. So that's the surprise, right? If we're looking at that October, they, even within their semi-frozen window, or at least the period where they should need to know, what they're going to need component wise, they were not even predicting what demand was going to be, because they had a sunset.
right, right. And it's, I mean, if you think about it, I've got age backlog here that goes out to July, right? So that means I've got 4 weeks of age backlog, which means that or 4 months, sorry. And if I stayed at 4 months, that means that if I think about my shipping plan out here to December, right? I would have that already handled by my backlog, right? And I've got to be thinking about booking, because whatever I'm going to book in December is stuff that I'm going to be shipping way out here in April of the following year, right? So when we think about those lead times, it's not just the lead time from supply, but it's also the lead time that gets factored in when I think about my backlog, right? Because I've got to be thinking about booking far enough in advance, because I'm going to be booking to fill the backlog out here, right? So it kind of all spills down to your point, right? If
Yeah.
I stop doing the booking plan out here, right, I'm really losing visibility of what the future shipment and supply plan is, right? So
You're losing
yeah,
the magic of the 5 section sheet. I always say that there's a brilliance behind looking at the numbers this way that emerges the more you use it, and you got to use the 12 month rolling window to get it.
yeah. And if I'm just flipped over here, sorry, Marshall, I just wanted to go to. I thought this slide here might be kind of valuable to look at, because when you think about forecast accuracy, you want to have that forecast out there. And in my frozen zone, it's got to be pretty accurate, right? And in many cases, some of that's going to be actually covered by backlog, right? Open orders. And then as I get out here, my forecast can be less and less accurate. My tolerance band is greater, because I'm out into the zone where the volume could potentially change, and depending on how I buffer it. Now this says MRP. This could also be related to a lean system where I'm using Kanban out here. You need to be able to think as you get out here into the future. I might not be as accurate on this, but I have more time to react, because I'm talking about something that's for whether it's 4 months or 4 weeks out into the future. And so that really kind of factors into this. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It means your expectation on how accurate that ends up being, and how accurate that will be. You need to adjust that, and it doesn't need to be as accurate the further out in the future.
Yeah, I love this slide. Good. Obviously, we're talking about some MRP terms on this slide, but back to what you said, this definitely can also apply to lean and how do we think about our flow rates that we're trying to enable through the Kanban sizing.
Yeah, and the way I would think about that, Marshall, it's a great point. So if I look at that, if I just look at the run rate, we don't have to focus on the numbers, but if I put these run rates out here, right, of what I plan to run, essentially what I want to do is, especially if I've got some sort of shift that's happening, right? So some, I'm moving it up or I'm moving it down or I got to build ahead or something like that. Um, when I look at this, I'm starting to think about how do I have to size my Kanban, right, out here in the future. And often I need to be thinking a few months in advance because even though I might be doing one piece flow, somewhere in my supply chain, whether it's my tier one or my tier two suppliers, I could have an issue where that is that I've got a level set for them to be planning for a higher volume or a lower volume. So, all right. I think that's about it. Oh,
Sorry. Getting too sophisticated here. I had myself muted and something else going on again, but
okay.
that's really helpful. Obviously, as we started this discussion, we said that um, uh, the frozen and semi-frozen zones can be kind of controversial for a lot of folks. I think what people are trying to do is preserve flexibility, and they actually are really impacting flexibility. Sometimes you're more flexible if you kind of lock down earlier and then open up later, which is what we're trying to kind of talk to people about. I also think that it's always a good impulse that folks have. I know one of the companies that we had trouble convincing they needed to freeze things in. It was only about a 1 week frozen zone, I think, maybe 2 weeks, but they really felt like they were the customer sensitive, move heaven and earth to meet any customer's desires kind of company, and that was providing both share and margin. And it might have sort of I don't well maybe some share. I don't think it was providing margin. I mean, when we got in there and started looking at it, they were actually continuously making lots of problems for all their clients, including the ones that they were trying to help. Because if you help somebody today, especially when we looked at the way the the bombs look when you get in close like that, then you're especially if you've got the backlog that's filling that whole section of the frozen zone and beyond, then you're just pushing people out of that. So by putting
Yep.
somebody in, you're pushing them out. And I think that it really bears taking a look at that discipline for folks. It's a good idea, and it might feel bad, but it's a really important impact on the long term flexibility and ability to meet customer promises you've made.
Yeah. If you pull up the 5-section sheet for a second, because I can demonstrate a little bit of what you just said, right? This
Yeah,
is what I love. This is what I love about the 5-section sheet. So I'm going to
sure.
geek out on you for a minute here, if that's all right. Um, so if you look right now for the month of April, I'm planning on shipping 13,154 units. Hopefully you can see that. Then I've actually got pretty much all of that in my promised backlog. So that's orders that I have put promise dates on that I've committed to customers. So I may think I have flexibility in this case, but I actually don't, right? Because to your point, if I'm going to ship something to a customer that I'm not already promised, I have to pull something out because that's what I've got in my shipping plan, and I can only get to that shipping plan because that is what my build plan is. Now, I I have actually built a little bit of flexibility into this plan because they are not running at their capability numbers. So they can 13.2 is what they say they can build or planning on building, but their capacity is 18. Now, I would question that for this family, and I have questioned that for this family because they have never demonstrated anywhere in the past that they got to that. Now, this was the first month that they planned to get that increase in capacity, but I would say they've got a pretty realistic plan that's in here. So they built some flexibility, some upside flex in here from a capacity standpoint, but they've got to make sure they're driving those components. And so I can actually have a pretty good discussion with someone about how much flexibility do you really have, right? And in their case, they've got 4 months of backlog. And it's pretty much sold out in that 4 months. So you can be as flexible as you want, but basically you're robbing Peter to pay Paul in that period of time,
Yeah. And
because that's all.
you're paying a price to rob Peter to pay Paul too. It's not perfectly efficient, right? There's
Right, right, right. And so, that is part of the, it's kind of you gotta deal with reality of where you're at. And by pulling this 5 section sheet together and pulling all that data in there, forcing the plan to be balanced, you're actually kind of forcing yourself to realize, well, what flexibility do I actually have? And then you overlay, as we talked about, you overlay those bill of materials on top of that. Know, okay, well, if I'm going to move stuff, it's not just impacting me today; it's impacting me into the future. It, think about S&OP as being that view that you grab when you sort of step back from the day-to-day stuff that I've got to do, all of the gyrations to make sure we're able to produce exactly. I'm stepping back and I'm looking at that plan. I'm looking far enough out. And hopefully today you kind of get the sense of why that's just so darn important, right?
yeah.
To do that. Because I'm dealing with inelasticity. It's just things that are hard to move. So hopefully that was helpful just in terms of the
I think
horizon.
so.
Yep.
Yeah, good stuff. It was good for me at least. I enjoyed it, and we'll be continuing with the what does good look like process. We've got responsibility and accountability coming up in October, but we do want to make sure folks know you can go to baserperformance.com, and there's a assessment for S&OP there that's got all of the what does good look like categories in it. It's free, and it'll give you prescriptive advice on what to do once you see your scoring. Probably you're not going to score 100% on everything, so don't get your feelings hurt, but it's there to help you, right? It's there to point you in a good direction. If you have any questions, just go to just email us at info@bezaperformance.com. We'll be happy to support you with that assessment any way you like. And if you need anything from DBM, including the book, you can go to dbmsys.com. There's a great book there on how to implement S&OP called Sales and Operations Planning, how to implement a process that everyone understands. So thanks again, Doug.
All right. Well, as always, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
That sounds good.